Dr. Sharma, I was wondering, I hear a lot of different sort of views about the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism. And I was actually just wondering how you might characterize that relationship, the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism.
Yeah. Let us go to a more fundamental question. How can we relate any two traditions? And we could also broaden it into how we can relate any two things. But the point I'm trying to make is that there are various ways in which the relationship between two traditions or things can be constituted. And that one may also have a certain measure of choice in this matter as to how one chooses to view certain things. Let me elaborate on this. Let us take the relationship between body and mind. Now, you see the difference between body and mind? Body is material, mind is immaterial. There's such a fundamental difference between these two things. And yet, our whole life is characterized by their virtually inseparable association, even at this moment. They are in constant association, even though we may not be conscious of it. See what I'm trying to point out to? They are so different, body and mind. And yet, the way we lead our life, we move from one into the other. Sometimes not even being conscious of the transition we are making. So this is one way of looking at things. The other way of looking at things is to, again, as to how things are so different, like oil and water. When the usual example is given, oil and water as two things which do not mix, though both are substances. Two things which were so different from each other as body and mind mix constantly, but to the point of becoming inseparable. Two things themselves are used to symbolize difference, that they do not mix. Then of course there can be the explosive mix between fire and oil. It's hazardous to mix them, to be brought together. And then of course there is the idea that without either, there would be neither. As in a married couple, if the two things were not there in some way together, they could not exist separately. So we have these various models. Hindus tend to look upon the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism on the body-mind, even if supposing that they are totally distinct. Even then, they would see them as inseparable in this way. Body-mind kind of inseparability. I think from the Buddhist point of view, it would be the neither-either separability. Because some of the ideas of Buddhism are Hindu-centric, not in the sense that they accept what the center claims to be, but in the sense that it challenges what the center claims to be, the Hindu center. The idea of a wandering ascetic, and you have an order of monks and nuns, organized order, and the idea of Atman and the idea of Anatta. Without either, there would be neither. It is clear from the case of Buddhism.
That would be
That
that's
would be
how
the case,
Buddhist,
right?
yeah.
Then you might say, how does it work from the Hindu side?
Yeah.
Because Hinduism was there before.
Right.
And of course, that's an interesting point, important point. And maybe Buddhism does not need Hinduism the way Christianity needs Judaism. To the extent that when Christianity became the imperial religion of Rome, Christianity did away, to put it quite bluntly, with all other religions. But Judaism remained the exception. Probably because Jesus was the Messiah of the Jews, and you cannot really get away from that. And maybe Buddhism is not dependent on Hinduism in the same way. Because although we can say that the doctrine of Atman is lodged in Hinduism, but one can also say that the idea of the permanent self is virtually a universal phenomenon. After all, we all have a sense of possessing a permanent self. So there's another way in which we can nuance the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism by recognizing that in another sense, Hinduism is as dependent on Buddhism as we claimed earlier. Buddhism might be on Hinduism because of the Atman idea. And that is that according to one view, Hinduism proper is the kind of religion which arose after the interaction of the Vedic tradition with Buddhism and Jainism. So if you give such an interpretation to the word Hinduism, then obviously Buddhism and Jainism and Indian materialism become natally connected with Hinduism. So these are the various ways of looking at it. Maybe at different points in history, the two communities have looked at each other in different ways. I personally like the idea of things being distinct but not separate. The way our various limbs of the body are distinct, but they are not separate in the sense that they are formed part of the same body. But I think this is a matter of choice. And of course, wherever it stands within these traditions. There are certain statements made about the relationship between Hinduism and Buddhism, which are worth examining in the light of the question you have raised. Some people try to blame Hinduism for the disappearance of Buddhism in India. Then to whom are you going to give the credit for the emergence of Buddhism? After all, Buddhism appeared from Hinduism. Then sometimes they argue that Buddha is accepted as an incarnation, whether it's a left-handed compliment, because his role was to mislead people. It is true that in some parts of the literature of Hinduism, this is how Buddha is depicted. But in other parts, it's a totally different story. He came into the world to put an end to animal sacrifices. So I think if we look at the two traditions in an Indic context, then at least for somebody like me, what they share stands out much more significantly than wherein they ostensibly differ. Of course, there are other ways of also looking at the relationship. These are speculative. But let us connect these traditions, not with each other, but place them in the context of the search for reality. So what you get here then, two models. One in which you assume that there is an Atman, or there is a permanent substratum in the individual and in the universe. The other one in which you assume that there is no such substratum, either in the individual or in the universe. And you are, of course, struck by the fact that they are contradictory positions. But could they not also be complementary? For instance, the nature of light has been a subject of scientific examination for a long time. And there's some controversy as to whether it is a wave or a particle.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they wish to consider it as a wave? Because it spreads, the way waves spread. Why do they want to consider it as a particle? Because when the photons hit something, they release some particles in the object, as particles do. What is going on here? What is going on here is, from one point of view, that some aspects of the behavior of light are best explained on the model that it is a wave. Other aspects of light, the behavior of light, are best explained on the model that it's a particle. Both are an attempt to get to the nature of light. Light is light. Similarly, when you are dealing with the ultimate reality, some of the aspects of that ultimate reality are best explained on the model that there is a permanent substance or substratum underlying us and the universe. Other aspects of it are best explained on the model that there is no such substratum. So both Hinduism and Buddhism then jointly help us understand the nature of reality.
Your answer kind of reminds me of a Jainist um, theory, or just sort of how truth is constructed, or is that?
Yeah, the idea of anekantavad. Yeah.
Right.
Yes. And we can even, now you might say that I'm using a modern model to look at Buddhism, at Hinduism and Buddhism, and in a sense make them appear complementary. But one could even argue that this position can be derived from those traditions themselves. We have to ask how.
How would you do that? How would you? How would you argue that?
We could argue. The basic point to recognize then would be that both these traditions recognize that the formulations they offer of the ultimate reality are not the ultimate reality. They are formulations.
Right.
Map is not territory. That is, they are themselves limited ways of approaching the ultimate reality. Now in Buddhism, and this is brought out, I think, in a very well-known sermon, in which the Buddha asked the monks, and I have also referred to this earlier and elsewhere, do you hold these views? And they say yes. And do you cling to these views? And they say no. What does it mean? That the views themselves might have to be fine-tuned, revised. You cannot cling to them because they are provisional to the actual experience. And Advaita Vedanta in Hinduism clearly accepts that it is a system. It is not the ultimate reality. It is an attempt to present the ultimate reality, which you can then experience. So in this sense, both Hinduism and Buddhism, as we are discussing them now, realize that they are self-limiting ways of dealing with intellectually self-limiting formulations. The formulation will never be misunderstood for what is being formulated. So this would then soften the blow of the charge that we made it up on the model of science.